So yeah, I thought I wanted to come and talk to you about quests, because for some reason, despite being addicted to Animal Crossing throughout my life, I completely fucking forgot it existed. So we'll do this instead. So yes, I wanted to talk to you about quest design, because I've done quite a lot of quests. I started studying at the University of Greenwich in 2006. And I did a degree in English for media writing. And in your first year, you don't really get to choose what your modules are, so everybody did the same standard modules, apart from me. Everybody else studied stuff like basic literature and film, maybe a bit of Gothic literature. I studied World of Warcraft for approximately, it was an 8-month intensive course. Involved a lot of team building, a lot of problem solving, horrendous damage to my biological clock. It gave me a lot of experience with quests. But I want to talk to you not about why I think some quests are great at first, but why I think they're fucking shit a lot of the time. I want to talk to you about 10 rats concept, which, judging from your faces and slight giggles, you already know about, which is essentially that there's a very, very common quest concept that you get given in role-playing games, which is kill 10 rats, collect 10 rat tails, deliver said rat tails to the owner of the pub so he knows all the rats are out of the basement. It's very convenient that there are only 10 rats. And this is generally seen as a tutorial for the whole game. And if this is the setup for the greatest adventure you've ever experienced in video games, it's fucking shite, and I'm quite surprised that people got away with it. Because the problem with quest design for a lot of the time is it basically looks like this. There is shit that's interesting, and there's shit you do in most quests. There are all the incredible things you could do in video games. You could fight a dragon, you could save someone who really needs your help. But a lot of quests are basically, look, I know you are the most powerful hero in the history of the universe, but I have lost 10 herbs. And I understand that you're a very busy human being, but I was just wondering, if you didn't have too much to do, would it be okay if you could perhaps take a look? I don't know where any of them are, because unfortunately in role-playing games, absolutely no one has a short-term memory, which is brilliant because it means I can strongly identify with every RPG character there is. So the other problem I found with quest design is that there's the concept of the hero. You are the hero. The biggest problem in World of Warcraft at first, when it first started out, was it made out that you were the biggest hero there was, no one else, which is a bit awkward when there are heroes that are way better equipped and more powerful than you running past you every 5 minutes, because there are about 70,000 of them on that server alone and about 10 million of them in total. You don't feel particularly special. But the interesting thing about games like World of Warcraft was they changed their quest design over time. And they started talking about teams of heroes and how heroes were band together. The quest design began to reflect that, start talking about grouping together to push back in larger conflicts. You became a smaller part of a greater thing, but your importance was never diminished. And yet, every so often, I've lost 10 herbs. If it's all right, would you be able to go and look? Right, so this is the biggest issue, which is, raise your hands, how many of you have played Skyrim? Awesome. So Skyrim, for those that haven't played it, is an incredibly vast open world, first person, well, third person if you want to, but I just think it looks fucking weird. I say that as a passionate fan of Mass Effect's Mako car. Like, the controlling is horrible. I don't know who that was, but I will identify you eventually. Right, Liam Neeson. So yeah, the interesting thing about Skyrim is that most people I've spoken to don't give a flying fuck about the main quest, which is a bit depressing because the main quest is about you being the most powerful human being seemingly in the history of the Elder Scrolls games, being able to harness the power of the dragons and defeat an even bigger dragon despite being very, very small in comparison. And that's super cool, but the problem with the main quest is that it treats you like an idiot from the start. You start as a prisoner, and the cool thing about starting as a prisoner in the Elder Scrolls games is that it's a common trope in fiction that to be released from prison, to be released from jail, you're allowed to start over, you're allowed to start from fresh. And that's quite an interesting concept for an RPG, and it's a very smart way to do it, because you can essentially invent your own life. Because like Manny Calavera, for example, Grim Fandango, doesn't matter what he did before, what matters is he's here now, and what he does from that point on. That's quite interesting. And the good thing about it is you have no idea how much experience you have. So I built a giant muscular Nord. I have a thing for building giant muscular men in video games. Usually it's not that big a thing. It's very distracting in Dragon Age Inquisition because they all look slightly moist. The most distracting thing, I love Dragon Age Inquisition. I run it on my PC at full specs, which is brilliant during the winter because you don't need a heater. But my issue with it is just I find it very hard to concentrate on what people are saying because everyone looks like they're wearing slightly too much moisturizer, and it bothers me and I can't focus on the quests. But it's also a game with another issue with the main quest, because the main quest, you kind of get dumped in at the deep end. You don't really know what's going on. And soon enough, you're spending an hour, like I did, chasing rams around a field. I don't feel like a particularly powerful warrior at that point. I feel like a fucking idiot. And that's just not what it's about. But the cool thing is side quests. The one thing that the design team for the Elder Scrolls games are really good at is side quests. They're so deep and they're so interesting. The thing about World of Warcraft and where it falls down in quest design is a lot of the really interesting mechanics they use in quests are in the main storyline quests. You only get to do the big interesting stuff when you're sticking to the path. Whereas with Skyrim, you get to explore and do all this amazing stuff. So I was thinking of potentially talking to you about one particular example that I think is amazing, that I may have accidentally subliminally flashed up earlier. So there's a quest in Skyrim where you encounter a talking dog. And I don't really feel like that's had the impact, so I'm going to do this again. There's a quest in Skyrim where you encounter a talking dog, and it's fascinating because you're like, oh, talking dog, this is brilliant. This is instantly game of the year, 10 out of 10. This is awesome because I've gone from Skyrim to Homeward Bound in like 2 seconds flat. Oh, brilliant. And he turns out to be an asshole. He turns out to be super tricky. There's a demon involved. It's an incredibly interesting quest path. But if I go over to the main quest, I travel up this incredible mountain. I see all these amazing sights. And I'm traveling to see these old monk-like men who will teach me the ways of the Dragonborn, which basically involves standing around with a load of old men as they go, right, if you stand in that spot, and then press this button. I want you to do that 3 times, and it's going to take about 5 minutes. And you're going to go from the most open world gaming experience to this horrible funneled thing. And they do that again and again and again in the main quest, and incredibly boring. I think that's such a shame. The big one I wanted to talk to you about is Mancrick's wife. And I think there's a World of Warcraft player in the audience because I just heard a noise of pain. So when you're in World of Warcraft, the second area that a lot of players will come across is this big open desert area called the Barrens. It is fucking boring because it's the Barrens, it's barren, it's not very interesting visually. The quests are very much the same. But eventually you get given a quest where you meet an orc called Mancrick, who seems like a friendly enough guy. And he tells you a story about how he was attacked by a group of enemies, as was his wife. And during that attack, his wife was overwhelmed, but he doesn't know what happened. So he was like, could you go and find out what happened to her? I need you to sort this out. And it's an NPC quest, like it's so similar to everything else you've already done. So you're like, right, okay, one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to go over there. Option number one, I'll find Mankrick's wife. We'll have a bit of a chat about what's happened, what's gone down. And then she will run out of wherever she is, go 50 yards down the road, and then fade out like Casper the Ghost and destroy everyone's immersion. The second thing that will happen is I'll go with her all the way back and I'll defend her repeatedly from groups of enemies, because that's my job, because I am the hero. And he says to you, have you found any sign of her at all? The pain in my chest tells me that the worst has happened. But I have hope that you will find her safe and sound. And you're like, cool, no pressure. But you're convinced, because all of the quests in World of Warcraft so far have just been you swatting everything. I mean, admittedly, some of them is kill 10 giant ostrich monsters, and that's not particularly interesting, the grand story. That is not something people are going to write poems about. That is not your big tale. So you go, and it turns out that she's dead. You find her eventually, and she's just a corpse on the floor. She's just dead. I mean, the slight error in World of Warcraft's design is there are about 10 different spells that you can use to resurrect people, and none of them work on her, so she must be ultra dead, I suppose. Conveniently narrative ultra dead. But the interesting thing about it is you just can't bring her back to life. So you go through what I think is the oh fuck moment. Just, Jesus Christ, what do I do? It's all gone wrong. I'm not the hero anymore. This doesn't make any sense. The whole game has been designed around NPCs giving you really, really easy quests that you can do, and nothing is ever a challenge, and nothing is ever scary because you're always just powerful enough to do it. Nothing's ever gone wrong. And then you get given the most emotionally important quest so far, because World of Warcraft is a long fucking game. Like, I was a hardcore raider in World of Warcraft for a while. I'm talking like hundreds of, like over 100 days of play time. This was horrendous. But in this entire time, this was the one quest that always really bothered me, because I just couldn't fix it. And it didn't matter how powerful I got. You're about level 15 when you encounter that. You can be level 100 now, and it still won't make a difference. And it's kind of interesting, really, that continues to happen. I think that's been the big problem with quest design from the beginning, is that people tend to create quests that don't really mean anything, and a lot of them are filler, and that sucks, and it's lazy, and it's bad game design. What you have is the opportunity to create interesting stories, and one of the things they don't do quite frequently in large open world RPGs is create stories using the environment. It's interesting to note that you don't really need to, like, you've been taught through the game at that point, if you click on a character and its life bar is empty and its name is grey, that character is dead. You've been taught that over and over and over again. So you already know she's dead from the moment you interact with her. She's not unconscious, because in World of Warcraft, if you're unconscious, you have a little bit of health. She's just dead. And the interesting thing about this quest, I think, is it was the only time where World of Warcraft, just really made use of the environment. And I think a lot of quests don't do that. They give you a big, big ream of text at the start, and then they send you off. And you can always refer to that big ream of text to make it interesting again. But that's not very good, is it? You wouldn't go to a museum exhibit and have a really good time if you got given a guidebook and then nothing had plaques on it, and it was all really boring, and you had to continuously leaf through this book in order to find the interest in what you were doing. They ask you to do that over and over again. Why am I collecting 10 herbs? Why is it so important? Where's the connection to the rest of the game? And of course there isn't one, because they just want you to do something for a bit. And that's a shame. So essentially, now that I've decided to tell you about the most depressing quest ever, I'm going to make it worse. In the latest expansion, you get to go back in time. And I went back in time, and I wasn't really expecting this. I'd heard about it, but I wasn't really expecting how much it was going to get to me. But you eventually meet Mancrick, the orc, as a child. And he needs you to bring him to the girl he likes. And you do that, and he talks about how difficult it is, and an older orc near him says, well, you need to get used to loss. You need to get used to grief, because this stuff's going to hit you eventually. And he says, no, because I'm a Frostwolf orc, and we don't lose. Which, like, fuck you, Blizzard, quite frankly. Because I'd already taken a week off work. I didn't intend to spend any of it in fucking tears alone at a keyboard, but there you go. But it was amazing that they did that, and it was super cool, because you go through quests so often, and it's always the horrible ones that go wrong. The best Dishonored character I remember, the best two, are the twins. You're supposed to assassinate a pair of horrible, snobbish twins, but you don't have to assassinate them. In fact, you can have them abducted, and then their tongues are cut off, their heads are shaved, they are anonymized, and they are put to work in the slave mines that they themselves own, with the slave masters having no idea who they actually are. And it was just, in amongst all of these other quests, that was just like, get a knife and stick it in that person, please, preferably very quietly. This one really stuck with me, and I think it's because quest design can be more than that, and can be really impactful. And I think that's fucking cool. And I hope you agree with me, and thank you very much.